I did want to do this show. Initially, your stories are so interesting. And in my defense, I wrote this joke before Salman Rushdie got stabbed, but I said, why should he get all the fatwas? Maybe I can be the first podcaster to get a bounty on my head by the Ayatollah. But it's not funny now because he just got attacked a few days ago. And when we first came on, I asked how you were doing, and you said, yeah, it's been a weird few days. I would imagine this is a scary time for anybody speaking out against Islam or about Islam that's not speaking in favor of religious fundamentalism, essentially.
Yes, it's a scary time. It's also really infuriating, though, because more than the fear, I feel like... So Salman Rushdie once said that terrorism is the art of fear. And the only way to defeat terrorism is to not be afraid. And I live by that. I've been living by that for a while. Obviously, he has, every reason to be living under fear, and he chooses not to. And if someone like him can choose not to live in fear, then obviously the rest of us can as well. Now, as we'll get into later on, with my husband being a terrorist, with him being a member of Al-Qaeda, did I just call him my husband? Ew, my ex-husband.
I was going to say your ex-husband, but, you do you. Yeah, the current guy seems pretty nice, but who am I to judge, right?
I hope my real husband doesn't hear that.
Nobody listens to this podcast. It's fine.
With my ex being a member of Al-Qaeda, I was scared into silence for many, many years, 15 years, in fact. Because I was afraid of his network and who he knew and who could. I changed my name. I changed my daughter's name. We never stayed in the same place for too long. I mean, I truly lived in fear. And you reach a point where you just get tired of it. You just get angry instead. You're just like, you know what? I'm not doing this. Come and kill me if you want to. I'm not doing this anymore. I'm over it. And what I felt when this whole Salman Rushdie thing happened was that same immediate sense of defiance. Like, you don't like his book? Okay, watch us give his book out for free. It's kind of like after the Charlie Hebdo, actually it was the Samuel Paty. He's the teacher in France who was beheaded because he showed some Charlie Hebdo cartoons. And after that, some cities in France like Montpellier took those cartoons and they projected them on buildings. And I thought that was the most perfect response. That's what you do. In the face of these people that are telling you, you are not allowed to have free expression, you are not allowed to have free speech, you are not allowed to have an opinion, you say, okay, watch this. Watch my opinion. Watch my free expression express itself. And that's what I want to do right now. So I'm working with a group. I'm giving you everything right away in the first couple minutes of our interview. Mm-hmm. But I'm working with a group called the Clarity Coalition. So we're a coalition of Muslims, ex-Muslims, Jews, Christians, atheists. It doesn't matter. Just all of us are working towards the same goal of defending liberties against Islamists. And so what we're going to try and do is have a event in the actual same place where Salman Rushdie was attacked. And that event will be all about free expression. And it's going to be just to show that we will not capitulate. We will not be terrorized. We refuse to cower.
It's so interesting, this event where he was stabbed. I was talking online. Someone said, this is what he had coming. It's just, Instagram trolls or whatever, Reddit trolls. And other people said, well, we don't have a motive yet. And I said, come on, guys. This is a guy who's had a fatwa, so like a religious... What is a fatwa? It's like the Ayatollah Khomeini said, go kill this guy and I'll give you $3 million. It's like it's a contract on your head, like the mafia, but for Islam,
Absolutely
I guess, right?
Correct. A fatwa just means a decree, so it could be anything.
Decree,
and this one is saying any Muslims who believe in Allah and want to protect the Prophet, go and kill Salman Rushdie and you will be a hero for all Muslims. I mean, if you read the wording of it, it could not be more, like you just said, it's a mafia hit on this guy's head. Kill him and we'll give you $3 million and we will all worship you and congratulate you.
Right. So when people say they don't have a motive yet, I'm like, come on, this is ridiculous. Let's not pretend we don't know what this is about. And people were like, you're racially profiling because of the guy's name. And I'm like, well, I'm using clues that everyone else has to come to a conclusion that's quite reasonable. It's totally different. And it's not like we don't know if the guy committed the crime. I didn't say, look, there's a brown guy in the audience. It must have been him. It's that guy who did it. He's on camera. He's there. And it's this kind of ridiculous gymnastics that people go through to say, well, we can't jump to conclusions. We can't say we know why this happened. And it's just unbelievable how much blowback I got. People were like, oh yeah, look what Israel's doing. And I'm like, yes, that stuff's bad. But also, we're not talking about that right now. That's not the same issue. Oh, well, America uses drone strikes. Yeah, I'm not for those either. But look, that's the guy that stabbed that guy in New York. Let's not get off topic. It's unbelievable how much blowback I got from seemingly real people online that were just, who otherwise might even be reasonable, but just lose their frickin' mind when it comes to being politically correct. And look, we'll get into that in a second because there's so much more to your story that I think we should start with. But I sort of got to experience just a tiny droplet of what you've experienced in your journey to speak out against this in the last few days, where if anybody thinks you're exaggerating about the PC blowback of criticizing fundamentalist terrorism from from Islamists or other fundamentalists, like, just go online and start talking about this, and you will find seemingly otherwise normal people just take their brain out and throw it in the trash can and type a response to you. It's just unfrickin' believable. I think what's most shocking about your story, one of the things that's most shocking, it's yes, there's crazy abuse that you suffered, and there's the abuse was intertwined with your religion, but all of these seemingly Stone Age practices and abuses that happened to you actually happened in Canada. And what you describe in the book sounds like something you'd hear. I expect to read that from somebody who says, I grew up in a rural province in Afghanistan or Pakistan, Peshawar or something like that. Not, I grew up in White Rock or outside of Vancouver. That's not what I thought. That's not what you expect to hear.
Yes, and I was actually surprised that was the most surprising part of my book for so many people, because
we should friggin' know better, right?
When people cross geographical boundaries, their ideology is carried with them in their mind. It doesn't matter if they're in Canada or in America or in Germany or in France or in Sweden. They're the same. These belief systems are carried within them, and so yeah, when you have these Islamic schools, when you have these mosques, when you see these young girls in hijab, it's no different than what's happening in Afghanistan. It's no different than what's happening in Saudi Arabia. It's just a different geographic location, but they're all following the same book. It's the same ideology.
And it's literally in many cases the same book, because isn't there kind of is it Wahhabi version of the Quran that the Saudis give out everywhere? And it's more extreme than a lot of the other versions, I think. I don't have a good comparison of Qurans in my head, but I know that the Saudis are pretty conservative when it comes to this stuff.
Actually, the Quran is not any different. It's always the same in Arabic. What is different is the translation. So the Saudi translation is not quite as whitewashed, as watered down as some other translations. So it's more direct, and it offers some interpretations that are seen as like extremist interpretations. So if you read the Quran in Arabic, let's just take chapter 4, verse 34, for example, because this is the thing that I would like to express. In the Quran, it says, in that chapter, verse 34, it says, if you fear arrogance or disobedience from your wife, then first admonish her. And if she doesn't listen, then don't share the bed with her. And if she still doesn't listen, then beat her. That's what it says in Quran verbatim. Those are the words, supposedly the words of Allah. So you'll find some translators won't translate it as beat her. They'll translate it as hit her lightly or hit her gently.
Okay.
But the Saudi version will say beat her. So this is what I mean by interpretations. Like when you're like me and Arabic is your first language and you read these kinds of things, you're reading, when you read it, the interpretation is, it's understood the way you understand the language, but when you're translating it into different languages, people can soften it a little bit, change things a little bit. And what I said by they offer their own interpretation is there's another ayah in the Quran that talks about cursing. There's many verses that talks about cursing Jews and Christians and non-believers, but this one just talks about cursing those who do wrong and those who have gone astray. And then the Saudi version will translate in brackets, they'll say, like the Jews and Christians. And so others will say, oh, no, you're making this more extreme. You shouldn't be doing that. So it's important to note that although the Saudi version in English looks more extreme, and it is the more extremist interpretation, the Quran does not change. It's the same, and it's all violent.
Gotcha. Because I'm picturing people that I know that grew up in the United States that don't speak Arabic but are Muslim, and they're like, dude, the book my parents gave me does not say that. I swear it doesn't say that. Like, come over and read it for yourself. But they're not reading the original Arabic. They're reading the Reform. You have the Jews that are just Reform Jews that are like, I'm Jewish, but only in holidays. They're kind of maybe that way. In terms of Muslims, they're like, I would never do this. My parents never taught me this. And it's because they weren't taught this. But when you look at what it actually says, you're just looking at, it's like Old Testament, where it's like, so I'm supposed to stone you to death because you wore mixed fabrics or something like that in your clothing. And it's like, well, nobody does that. Well, actually, there for sure are Christians that would do that. They live in other places, or they did that thousands or hundreds of years ago. That's part of it's what it says. It doesn't get translated into the version that you get at your local church down the road because it's freaking creepy.
Yeah.
It's weird.
You're absolutely correct.
It doesn't
fit.
What's
worse here is that it's not up to personal interpretation. It's up to the Sharia law people, the scholars of the religion, the scholars of Islamic law. It's up to their interpretation. And that's why in 15 different countries, if you're gay, you're executed. Or if you leave Islam, you're executed. All sorts of punishments. There's a woman that I just posted about right before I started this interview with you, who got sentenced to 34 years in prison in Saudi Arabia. She's considered a terrorist because she retweeted a few things in support of Saudi Arabian feminists. So, these are not, it's not like talking about, oh, if you mix fabrics, they're going to stone you. Like that's something that never happens. These things happen. These things are happening every single day all across the globe. What is in that book is actually reality. Nobody's following the Old Testament anymore. None of those punishments are in any laws of any countries. But the Islamic law is in many countries around the globe. People are suffering daily because of it.
I saw that, and I'd like to say, oh my God, I couldn't believe that she got that harsh prison sentence for she's not even an activist on Twitter who's stirring up trouble. She retweeted and followed people who were activists and then got, her life is, if they carry out this sentence, her life is over. She's probably like, how old is she?
Yeah.
30, 25?
Yeah.
She's young. So she's going to be in prison until she's the age of a lot of people, who have grown kids. She's not going to have a life now.
She has young children
basically.
as well that she's not going to get to see.
Oh, she does. That's even worse. That's even worse than not being able to have. That's horrible. And I'm hoping it's. I don't even know what I'm hoping they go. Oh, okay, maybe we're going to let her go. We got the news story. Everybody's scared. Let her out. But I just don't. I don't know if that's how Saudi Arabian justice system works. When it comes to religious police, they don't seem like people who are thinking rationally because they are religious police, which two things that are, from an American/Western perspective, totally should be separate and not part of the same thing. But religious police, it's a foreign concept for us, literally and figuratively. So you recount from childhood abuse for not memorizing the Quran, which is interesting because it seems like, are you memorizing it in Arabic or are you memorizing it in English? You're
No,
memorizing it in Arabic.
It's in Arabic.
Okay.
And memorizing the Quran is what's valued, not understanding it, not discussing it, not critically analyzing it or anything. It's just regurgitating it. And so they teach kids from a young age to just repeat it. Now, it is written, it's Fusha, it's classical Arabic. So it's not exactly the kind of Arabic that we would speak today, but if you are an Arabic speaker, it is pretty clear what's being said most of the time. Some things you have to look up and say, it's a word that we don't use anymore or something like that. But people who are from other countries, 80% of Muslims don't even speak Arabic. I have to say that. Like it's the vast majority.
That's a good point. People don't really realize that, and that proves other points that you've made in your book and elsewhere, which is a lot of Muslims don't share any cultural sort of, what would you even call this, like facets or cohesion, right? You're talking about people who live in Indonesia, they live in Dubai. I mean, they don't share food, they don't share clothing other than traditional Islamic garb, maybe on women. For the most part, they don't share a language. They don't have a shared history other than stuff that happened, supposedly thousands of years ago that appears in the Quran. That's it. They're on the other side of the world, and they haven't communicated until recently for a long time.
Yeah, absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. It's like expecting a Catholic person in Mexico to share the same culture as a Catholic person in Italy. Well, no, they don't. They're completely different people, the different language, like you said, all of the things that you said, but they share a religion. And so they're going to have some things that overlap, and those things that overlap are always religion. And so people always refer to Muslims as some monolithic cultural group. First of all, there's nothing monolithic about Muslims. Second of all, they are not one cultural group at all. They're very, very distinct, different cultural groups. And even when I say Arabs, within that, there's like 22 different kinds of Arabs. And within the Arab countries, there are other ethnic groups that don't have their own state. So that like the Kurds
Bedouins
and the Druze
things.
and exactly. Yeah, the Yazidis. So there's so many different kinds of people in there that are just being erased. And there's these memes that show, because this is the most visual way to show the contrast of women. There's like 25 different women on this meme dressed in their traditional garb from all these different countries, Yemen, Egypt, everywhere, what they used to look like before, Indonesia, and then everybody covered in black head to toe and saying, you have to understand that Islam, that these people were colonized by Muslims. These people's cultures were erased by Islam. We talk today, we're so, we puff up our chest and we speak up so loudly against when the United Kingdom would colonize or when France would colonize, rightfully so.
Mm-hmm.
But we do not have that same kind of energy when we're talking about how Arabs went around colonizing people, erasing. I'm Egyptian. Mm-hmm. My family is from North Africa. Like we don't even have anything to do with Arabs. And Egypt is now called the Arab Republic of Egypt. Mm-hmm. And our language is Arabic. And a lot of Egyptians call themselves Arabs. A lot of them these days are saying, I'm not an Arab, I'm an Egyptian. And they're same thing is happening in Iraq, even in Saudi Arabia, like you said, the Bedouin groups and the groups in Morocco and Algeria and all over, their cultures have been erased, and they're trying to get them back again now.
Bosnia comes to mind. A lot of when I lived in Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, even when I lived there, they still called it Yugoslavia. A lot of the Serbs would say, "What are these Bosnians doing? They were just colonized by Arabs or by Moors or whatever it was back in the day, and now they're saying." They're defending this. It's like, throw the yoke off, man. The Ottoman Empire's over. They are almost like, we're here to rescue you from this bullshit. What are you doing? You're trying to defend this thing. So a lot of Serbs were saying like, yeah, we're destroying Moss. We're not trying to destroy your culture. We're destroying these occupiers that came in hundreds of years ago. Why are you so bent out of shape about it? Which obviously that argument doesn't hold a lot of water. If somebody's grown up that way for 5 generations, yeah, you're going to hurt their feelings when you destroy their places of worship and their holy sites. But I kind of understand where the line of thought comes from, at least, even if I don't agree with it. Um, your mom married this guy who had other wives, which, in case you weren't paying attention, illegal in Canada. He had the wives apply for social assistance. I assume that's illegal to do, to have multiple wives and then have them all
But it
apply for
happens all the
assistance.
time.
That seems like a kind of, that's a despicable practice to have a bunch of single mothers that really aren't single. They're married to you, so you just don't have to do anything because you have 5 welfare families or 3. That's kind of gross, no matter what
Absolutely.
way you look at it. Yeah. You're just leeching at that point for no good reason.
But they don't think of it as leeching. They think of it as if the infidels are stupid enough to do this, then why would we not take advantage of it? It's there. We're doing it right in front of them, and they're letting us. And they are very aware of this happening. They're very aware of it happening not just in Canada, but all over the United Kingdom as well, and probably in other countries. I wouldn't be surprised. But they don't do anything about it. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to offend Muslims. It's just not the millions of dollars of taxpayers' money that's being funneled to people who don't need it is not important to them to investigate.
Yeah, it's an annoying practice, and what really sucks is there probably are tons of single moms, Muslim or not, that are now going to go through an extra rigorous process to verify that they're not doing. So they're just making it harder for people who actually need this because maybe not the presumption, but certainly there is some evidence that people are abusing the system. So it's just annoying to hear about this in so many ways because I'm married and I have 2 kids and we have a lot of help from family. I can't even imagine how hard it is to be a single parent that has a 9-to-5 job. I work from home. I'm on Easy Street and it's still really, really hard with 2 kids. So to have a single mom who's now got to get documents together and prove that they're not scamming the system because some people are like, stupid infidels are going to pay me to have 3 wives. It just really gets under my skin. And I'm sure that I'm not the only one who feels that way. Describe your living situation with this so-called uncle and his first wife, because it's bizarre by any measure.
Yeah. So she is a French-Canadian convert to Islam.
Your mother.
And sorry, the first wife.
The first wife, okay.
Yeah, the first wife is a French-Canadian convert to Islam, and she lived upstairs, so she lived in the normal house. And my mom was the second wife, so she was the subordinate. And so we lived downstairs in the unfinished basement, basically. And so there was a real hierarchy between first wife and second wife. And this is a common thing all across the Arab world and even the Western world when there are people that have more than one wife. The first wife is sort of the dominant, and then every subsequent wife after that is subordinate to her. So that was us. We were the subordinate family, and we knew it. And we were always, it's really horrible now to look back and realize how much I internalized that. And
Sure.
I didn't realize how much it affected me to know that, that I was subordinate.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well,
growing up. Yeah.
It's like,
horrible.
these are the kids that are most important, and I'm part of the family that's not as important. So, an emotional and physical abuse aside, it would be like if you had 2 kids and you said, "Now listen, your brother's the one I love the most, and you're a close. You're not a close second, but you're a second, and you over there, you're the third. So you're kind of on the chopping block. If I ever decide I don't like your mom, but all right, kids, we're just gonna live like one happy family." And the kids, of course, they're not going to ignore that exists. They're going to act that way, and they're going to grow up with that idea that you are second-class or third-class citizen, even in your own home. So why would anybody outside your house treat you well if that's how you get treated by your dad?
Yeah. Yeah. The whole idea of polygamy is such a misogynist idea. It's so insidious. It is so manipulative. It is used to control women in so many ways. There's this constant kind of hanging over your head that you know, if you don't have a boy, if you just keep on having girls, then he's going to marry another wife. If you get sick and aren't able to like clean the house and cook and do the dishes or whatever, then he'll get another wife. It's just like this constant threat. If you start to get fat, if you get wrinkly, he's going to get another younger wife. Like it's just this, women are commodities. Women are chattel. Women are this thing that needs to perform up to his standard, or he's just going to replace her with another one. And what often happens too is that, yeah, he'll be filled up with 4, but then if one of them misbehaves or whatever, then he'll just get rid of her and then fill in another one in her place, because the 4 is the maximum. And what's important to note here is that men can divorce women very easily. They just have to use their magical voice. They have to just say the words, "You are divorced." If they say the words, "You are divorced," 3 times, by the 3rd time, poof, they're divorced. That's it. There is no mechanism for a woman to divorce a man. These days, when a woman wants to divorce a man, she can go to an Islamic court and hope and pray that the judge will listen to her and will grant her the divorce. But there's no actual mechanism in Islam for that to happen. So it's completely up to the judge to decide. So if you look at the imbalance between how easy it is for a man to divorce his wife and how just unheard of it is for a woman to divorce her husband, that gives you another inkling as to the misogyny.
Yeah, the power imbalance is just it's not even in the same universe as. And I was reading online that if in order for a woman to get divorced in an Islamic court, it basically you have to say something like, "My husband is forcing me into prostitution, and it's against the Quran for me to do this because I'm a mother of." And then they're like, "Oh, is that true?" And the guy basically has to say, "Yep," and admit the whole thing, or have like real obvious evidence, like other people, men testifying, or like a video recording of him being like, "You have to go bang that dude for money so I can buy a new car."
Yeah.
I mean, it's really not like, look, we don't get along. He hits me sometimes. It's not even that. That's tough rocks. You're the wife. It has to be so egregious that actually this man's rights in the Quran are superseded by these other things that are in the Quran that say you just can't do that to humans. And that's a tall bar.
Correct.
Like a really tall bar.
Absolutely. Impossible.
Right, because you can light people on freaking fire according to certain things in the book, or so I've read online. Again, I'm not a scholar here. You can throw people off roofs if they're gay. So you really have to the mind struggles to imagine what you would need to do to get a divorce as a woman under Islam, other than like I said with the prostitution thing. Tell me what your life was like with this man, because your mother. Look, I know she's your mom. This isn't going to sound super polite. She is nuts.
I mean, that is super polite, actually.
Yeah, that's the polite version of what I kind of wanted to say. But she grew up in this very privileged situation. Your mother's uncle was the first president of Egypt, so she was like, I assume, kind of loaded growing up. Living the life, living the dream.
She was when she was young, but as it happens in these countries, when there is a government in power and then the next government comes into power, they have to eradicate the guy before. They have to flatten him and his family. There's no a peaceful transfer of power ever. And so when she was young, she was incredibly, they were very rich. She was very privileged. They had all sorts of, huge mansion and servants and blah, blah, blah. But, when she was still young, they lost everything. And so she didn't continue growing up like that, but in her mind, she was still that person. So in her mind, she still thought of herself, and her mom grew up they still thought of themselves as fancy people, even though they were all in sardines shoved into this apartment building together. they still in their minds, they were, descendants of.
Right. Aristocratic blood
Yeah.
or whatever. There's this, not even a story, but an anecdote of your mother obviously endured some abuse too. She poured hot oil down her brother's throat, which as a parent just makes me want to cry immediately. It's
Oh,
just
that
so.
wasn't my mother.
Oh, was
That
it?
was that was a story of a woman that was telling me that her mother had done
Ah,
that.
okay.
Yeah, and that was to show
Ugh.
that people read my book and they think, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe things are so horrible. I can't believe things like that happened." And as many people from Afghanistan and Somalia and Sudan and Yemen and from all around the world, you know, they read my book and they think that I lived a fairy tale existence.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So
Because you
it
got to go to
really,
school and things like that.
it's all relative.
Ugh.
Yeah. Yeah. Or from, I think of girls in Afghanistan right now and how they're living. Just compare my life and how I grew up to girls in Afghanistan right now who are not allowed to go to school, not allowed to leave the house unless they're covered head to toe in this burqa. They're not allowed to, they're not allowed to get educated, they're not allowed to get jobs, they're not allowed to do anything. They're barely allowed to breathe. And so yeah, I was always very aware of it being so much worse for so many other people. And I did always feel privileged. And that's part of the reason why I didn't write the book for so long, because I felt like, who am I to whine when there's so many people that have it so much worse? But then in the end, it wasn't about whining. It was about educating, and it was about letting people know this is happening in your backyard. And if you don't care about what's happening in Afghanistan or what's happening in Pakistan, or what's happening in Saudi Arabia, then care about what's happening on your own soil, at least.
Yeah, it's beyond creepy to think that that's happening in my neighborhood potentially. And tell me why your mother was the perfect vessel for religious fundamentalism, because it seems odd to people that somebody who grew up privileged and had everything is going to then go, "Oh, I want to live this almost ascetic lifestyle where everything is kind of crappy, especially for me as a woman and my kids." I think it sheds
Yeah.
light on the type of people who get sucked into this stuff.
Yes, and that's exactly right. So I had asked myself that question so many times as well. And I have discovered through watching so many documentaries and reading so much on cults that single mothers are uniquely, they get uniquely vulnerable to this. They get victimized, they get pulled into cults quite easily. Like I explain in my book, my mom and my dad were together in San Francisco and they moved to Canada, and that's when their marriage fell apart. So she didn't really know anybody in Canada, and he left her. And so here she was alone with 3 kids. So she went to the mosque looking for community, looking for support. She wasn't especially religious at all, but it was community. She spoke Arabic, and she's looking for other people that speak Arabic. She's looking for that community connection. And that's when it all went pear-shaped. That's where she found this guy. And the thing about Islam is it really is simple. It's a very simple religion, black and white, right and wrong. And there's no room for nuance, and there's no room for gray. And she was very depressed at that time. She was very kind of looking for guidance, looking for support, looking for something. And this religion came along. And again, she had it in her already because she grew up in Egypt. She grew up in a Muslim majority country. So all of this stuff was already familiar to her, even though she wasn't practicing. But it basically told her the reason why your life is bad is because you're not following the religion properly. You're not covering your hair. You're not praying 5 times a day. You're not, reading Quran. You're not doing all the things that you're supposed to do. So if you did all the things that you're supposed to do, you would find happiness. You would find peace. You would find prosperity, right? And she bought the bullshit. She thought that if she repented for all of her years of wearing makeup and mini skirts and dating boys and listening to music and whatever, and if she just started to become a better Muslim, then she would get paradise in the end.
On the same sort of angle here, why do you think Western kids from affluent families went over to join ISIS in decent numbers? You probably have a fairly inside/unique perspective on this, because that was mystifying. You know, when I heard that people went to join ISIS, I was like, oh, these are going to be these like incel, alone, no friends, nothing to live for. But it turned out like it's like a medical student who's got a residency at a hospital in the UK. And you're like, what are you doing? You're blowing up your whole life. You're going to go die in a ditch unceremoniously away from your parents and your brothers and sisters.
So, in the same way that some people growing up Christian are hearing all the time about the apocalypse is coming and blah, blah, blah. We always hear about how the caliphate is coming, how Islam will rule the world, how Muslims will get rid of the infidels. We're going to kill off all the Jews, and Muslims are going to control this whole world. And the whole world will go back to Allah the way it should be. Everybody on the planet will be praying to Allah.
Mm-hmm.
And you hear about this day in and day out, every single khutbah, every single sermon on the Friday prayers is on and on and on about this, how Muslims will be victorious, blah, blah, blah. And so the virus was in our minds, in all of our minds. And all ISIS had to do was activate it.
Yeah.
Oh, caliphate is here. And everybody that had been hearing from their birth that this was going to happen and you have to be prepared. When it happens, you have to be ready to go fight for Allah. When it happens, you have to be willing to stand with your Muslim brothers and sisters against the infidels. Are you ready for that? Are you prepared for that? And so it was, I mean, I've talked about it in my book, how my mom would actually name my friends. She would name them. Like Tiffany was my best friend. And she'd use her name and be like, are you prepared to kill Tiffany when the caliphate rises? Like it was that insidious. It was that deeply manipulative. And, you know, it's all kind of like theoretical. You just say what you need to say. You do what you need to do because it's not really real. And you don't think it's ever going to be real in your lifetime. But there you go. It ended up becoming real. And that's why when people think that these guys or these men and women got groomed over the internet in like 6 weeks or something, it's an absolute joke. No, they were not groomed over the internet. These kids were born and raised in this ideology. This is all they heard growing up all the time. And in fact, it was like this, it's like when you think something isn't going to happen in your lifetime, and then like if Jesus came back, all these people that are waiting for Jesus to come back, imagine if he did, how they'd react. You know, they would be so happy that they were alive when this wonderful miracle happened. And that's exactly how Muslims reacted when ISIS came to be.
I would imagine growing up in this culture makes it more difficult to relate to your secular friends in Canada. You said your parents or your mom was asking you to pledge to kill your friends, not a hypothetical at that point either. But you're taught non-believers are enemies. And on the other hand, those are the people that are being nice to you. Your mom is like selling your clothes or giving your clothes away when you move without your permission. And your friends are giving you gifts and presents and asking you to come over and ride bikes, which you're not allowed to do because of this weird obsession with girls' hymens, but that's a whole nother thing. That's got to make it, you got to really feel like a square peg trying to fit through the round hole living in the West, growing up like that.
100%, absolutely. And as so many of us have said, it's like you feel like you're not just in a foreign country, but on another planet, which is so crazy because I'm born and raised in Canada. You hear my voice. It doesn't sound like I have an accent.
Right.
It sounds like I was part of Canadian culture my whole life. I was so detached from Canadian culture. I mean, my husband is Canadian now, and we're around the same age, and he could talk about like songs that came out or shows or movies. Like he was floored. What do you mean you haven't seen Jaws? Like he couldn't believe it. What do you mean you haven't seen Goonies? I'm like, I remember hearing these words, but no, I've never seen these movies. I've never, listened to these songs. And it was like we were in a bubble. We were in the society, but we weren't a part of it. We were completely separate, living parallel. And you can physically see that in so many countries today, like in France or in Sweden, all over Europe, in the UK. My gosh, it's very clear there. One woman that I was speaking to grew up in Scotland, and she grew up in such a Pakistani ghetto, that she actually does have an accent, because and her mother's Scottish. Her mother was a convert. But she was so separated from the rest
Wow.
of the world around her. And you see the same thing with the Hasidic Jewish communities in New York.
Yeah.
You'll find people there that are like, they've only ever spoken Hebrew. Like, you're in New York
Or Yiddish. Yeah.
and you don't even speak English without an accent. So we're there, but we're physically there, but we're not a part of the society.
The prevalence of child sexual abuse in a lot of these countries it seems like it's off the charts. You sort of touch on this in your book, that it's not just allowed in some ways, but it's almost revered. And I guess that's because the Prophet Muhammad took a wife at like 6 years old. And then the retort is, well, he waited until she menstruated at age 9, which is just nonsense, honestly, anyway. But that sort of says, well, humans haven't changed since then, according to what we want to believe, which is based in the year 600 something, I guess.
Yeah, and it's not even just about normalizing child marriages, but it's about revering child marriages,
Hmm.
because Muslims are taught that the Prophet Muhammad is the best example for all humanity for all time. So however he lived his life is the best way to live your life. Okay? So
Hmm.
that is what they say about a man who married a 6-year-old child. So that's why there are so many girls forced into sex slavery. It's essentially sex slavery. These are children, and they're I get so it's really upsetting how Muslim women can be victims of child marriage themselves and then go ahead and push their daughters into child marriages as well. Like, it's become such a vicious, normalized thing. It's like female genital mutilation. Same thing. The most vicious things about women become so normalized, and to be honest, the women are just as responsible as the men are.
As a parent of small children, or any children, a lot of the book was actually very, very hard to read, as you might imagine, because you grew up in what almost sounds like Abu Ghraib level of abuse and control. And yes, I realize the irony of using that example, but I do it on purpose because it really is. Because you're living in a basement, and like even other people came over who were other, I guess, sort of strict Muslims, and they're like, "What are you doing? Why is your family living like this? It's just weird, man. You got to move them out." And finally, I think I'll say weird uncle, even though he was your mom's husband, even he was kind of finally like embarrassed into making changes just because it was so repressive. It just didn't even fit. It was just weird by any standard, seemingly at that point.
Yeah, I think that, obviously, like I said earlier, Muslims are not a monolith.
Right.
There's definitely those that are more extremist, those that are more fundamentalist, those that are more literalist, and then those that have more liberal interpretations. And when you're living in the West, you're going to see much more of a variation, because the West offers another narrative. It offers liberalism, feminism, equality of LGBT. There's other ideas out there that, when you're living in a country that is 90% Sunni Muslim or even more, those ideas just are never going to cross your path. You'll never hear about them. You'll never see them. You'll never know about them. But of course, these days they're different with the internet, thankfully. But this is part of the reason why I started my podcast YouTube channel called Forgotten Feminists, where I speak to different women from around the world to tell me their experiences and how they grew up. And it's really just to let people know that this isn't my unique experience, that I wasn't something special or different or, against the grain, that the way that I grew up is so similar to the way women grew up, not just all over the West, but all over the world. And that again goes back to the common thread being this book and the edicts of this book and the teachings of this book. And so if everybody is following the same book, regardless of where they are in the world, they're going to be acting in the same way. Now, having said that, it's kind of like there's that balance. Like, this is the book, this is what it says. Everybody knows that this is what the book says and this is how we're supposed to be, but not everybody is going to live that way.
Mm-hmm.
So we did have a lot of, they're not the Muslim community that I interacted with. They
Right.
all were going to the Islamic school. They were all wearing hijab. They were all, they were all wearing niqab.
So this sort of begs the question, or I'm misusing this, but everyone misuses it. It sort of brings about the question here, the idea that is the religion the abuse here, or is religion merely the vehicle for the abuse here? In other words, do you think you would be abused by this family and these people, even if you had no organized religion? Because it sure sounds like they were a bunch of kind of kooky, nutty, abusive people.
So I have two responses to that question. The first one I'm stealing from Sam Harris, where he brings the example of the family of Jehovah's Witnesses who have a little girl who needs a blood transfusion. And if she doesn't get that blood transfusion, she's going to die. But they choose to let her die because blood transfusions are against their religion. When that happens, we don't think, are those people just crazy and, wanting to just kill their daughter? Would they kill their daughter even if they weren't Jehovah's Witnesses? Are they just the kind of people that don't value human life? Like, we wouldn't ask that question in that context.
That's true. That's true.
But for whatever reason, it's different when it comes to Muslims. So from that, you can glean that my answer is these people are indoctrinated into a belief system that turns them into monsters. It erases their humanity. It tells them your basic humanity and what you believe to be right and wrong, you must ignore, and you must follow what you are told to do. And just like every other cult, they can be led to drinking the Kool-Aid and killing themselves and their kids, or all of the other ridiculous things that cult people have done. It's an indoctrination. It's a brainwashing. And the second answer to that question is this religion offers sanctuary to abusive people. So when we go back to that verse in the Quran that I mentioned about instructing a husband, if you fear disobedience or arrogance from your wife, then you should do X, Y, Z, and then beat her. Now, that's not to say that every man is going to beat his wife if he fears arrogance or disobedience from her. But it's going to say that when a Muslim man chooses to beat his wife, he's got doctrinal support. He's got support from the creator, the almighty creator of the universe, to beat his wife. And so there is no court system, there's no law enforcement, there's no criminal system, there's no nothing that is going to supersede. There's no human that's going to tell him you can't beat your wife after Allah has given him permission to beat his wife. So yeah, it indoctrinates them into this belief system, and then it creates a protection for them to continue. And that's like when we were talking about the child marriage issue, that's why the child marriage issue is so difficult. This is why we can't progress. This is why these Muslim countries can't progress. And this is why it's so difficult for feminists to get any progress in these countries, is because the religion has fossilized people's minds into 1400 years ago. It's just stuck. And so while cultures grow and change and progress, and this religion forces people to just get stuck in time. And so it is the root of so many of the evils that are happening in these countries. Because if you break this, if you allow people's secularism, then people are not going to if people aren't brainwashed into doing these things and feeling that if they don't do them, then they're going to burn in hell for eternity, or they're never going to go to heaven, then they won't want to naturally do them.
That does make a lot of sense, right? It's sort of hard to separate what percentage of this is being born into the wrong family versus what percentage is cultural, or what percentage is, hey, this is what this book encourages or even mandates in many cases. Because a lot of folks are going to say, hey, this is not the normal everyday experience of a Muslim woman growing up in Canada. Come on, Jordan, you're cherry picking an example that's particularly horrible. But on the other hand, you're right. If we don't criticize things that need to be criticized, they don't progress. They fossilize, they calcify. We got rid of slavery and other horrible things here in the West way too late, I might add. Do we have work to do? Yes. But we know this because we hear criticism of America and Canada every single day in the news, all over the place. But somehow it's just not okay to criticize these other cultures. Back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, you go online and you go, yeah, it's really backwards that this place. I was talking about Iran and North Korea on a podcast, and it was a live thing. And I said, these are terrible governments. They don't do, the people who live there are oppressed. And someone was like, aren't you being a little ethnocentric? And I was like, if ethnocentric means standing up for people to have the right to be gay without getting thrown off of a roof or thrown into a concentration camp because they didn't worship the fat old leader of this country or the old group of old men that marry kids, then yeah, I guess I'm being ethnocentric in that I stand for human rights and these people stand for authoritarian, oppressive, totalitarian nonsense. It's just like, why are we trying to draw this weird line where I'm the weirdo for sticking up for people who don't want to be raped as a child?
Yes.
That's just weird.
Absolutely agree with that 100%. People have taken this cultural relativism, this moral relativism, this ethnocentrism to like some ridiculous degree where they forget that we're all human beings. So an ethnocentric, a negative, that would be something like judging French people for eating frog legs, or judging, other, Chinese people for eating scorpions. I know they don't all do that, but that is a thing there.
Right.
That's you saying that's gross. Meanwhile, here we are over on this side of the world eating, I don't know, deep fried butter. Just gross things.
Corn dogs.
Right.
Hot dogs are gross if you think about it. Any hot dog related item is gross. Yeah, when I grew up, my best friend was Persian when I was a kid, and they sat on the floor and ate dinner. And I remember one day I said, "This is so weird," and his mom said, "It's not weird. It's just different." And I was like, "Oh, that's true. It's just different. I'm used to sitting at a table." That's ethnocentric.
Yes.
I was like 9.
Exactly.
Okay, I can be forgiven for that.
This
but
is
when
different.
you're talking about yes, it's different.
Rights.
You're talking about human rights. Nobody in their right mind is going, well, some cultures rape kids, and that's just the way they are. So the story of your wedding paints this grim image. You wrote, I'll just start you off with a quote from your own book. I just sat there as strange women did my makeup, and I kept crying and ruining their work. They would just touch it up and continue. Nobody thought to ask what was happening or why we were doing this. And in Islam, silence is consent. So if you're getting married and you just cry through it, that's consent. And it's, again, remember, this is Canada. This is not a village in Yemen or Saudi Arabia somewhere or Oman or whatever. This is a girl getting married in Canada and is crying nonstop, uncontrollably. And everyone's like, oh, okay, I'm just going to wipe that thing of mascara off and redraw it. And you'd think sane people would go, what the hell is wrong with this picture? You're supposed to be happy. You're obviously not happy. Somebody's got to talk to your mom and say, this is obviously not right. Your daughter's crying and shaking. And everyone's like, oh, it's fine. Everybody everybody acts like they're getting sentenced to a prison. It's like you would expect somebody to be when they're hearing the verdict in a murder case for their son or themselves. And this is you in the makeup chair at your own wedding. And nobody thinks, oh, maybe we should be concerned about this.
No, because that's probably what they looked like on their wedding day. And that's what they expect their daughters to look like on their wedding day. And it's just, it's brutality, but it's normalized brutality. So it's like when I was referencing before female genital mutilation, child marriage, so many aspects of this misogynist religion are carried out by other women. This kind of brutality of women, these kinds of vicious things that happen to women wouldn't be able to happen without the consent and active participation of other women. And it's a really difficult thing for me to come to terms with. It really was. Because it's so easy to say, oh, it's the men, oh, it's patriarchy. But, it's women that take a razor blade to a little girl's clitoris and slice it off. It's not men that are doing that.
Yeah, thank you for using that example, because I don't want people to be able to say that this is some kind of one-off thing. I mean, there's a practice of a lot of this in a lot of places. And also, you mentioned that, yeah, maybe there's not FGM, female genital mutilation, happening in Canada, although I bet there is. But you can take your daughter to another country to go visit family, and she comes back without a clitoris, right? I mean, that's how this works a lot of the time.
That's exactly it. Yeah.
Which is horrifying.
From the U.S., from everywhere. This is something that the Ayaan Hirsi Ali Foundation is working strongly on. But, in the UK, the statistics were absolutely atrocious. The numbers of girls that were ending up going to the doctor because of complications. Because FGM is done, these are not done by professionals with their sterilized equipment, right? These are just like
right, it's not a dentist.
No, yeah. This is just random, stuff happening in they have like a party, and it's like this big celebration because she's like entering womanhood or whatever. But it's not being done by, it's not regulated in any way. And so they would go for, like you said, vacation cutting. They would take the girls to wherever, Somalia, Egypt, and come back, and there'd be complications. And then so they'd end up in the hospitals in the UK. Astronomical numbers of kids with complications due to this mutilating of their bodies for no reason. And even though it's against the law, even though it's a criminal offense, nobody's ever been prosecuted. And so when you don't prosecute people for doing a criminal activity, you're basically saying, hey, don't worry about it. Just keep going. Nothing's going to happen to you. You are endorsing it. And so it's like criminalizing it is a waste of time anyway. And they know that nothing's going to happen to them.
It's crazy to me to think about when you think about female genital mutilation, because if you circumcise a young boy, okay, it's a medical thing. It happens in a hospital, and it's not the same. I think a lot of people don't realize that this is more like cutting someone's penis in half rather than cutting off the foreskin. You're cutting away a piece of it. The foreskin, yes, it's a piece of it. I'm sure it hurts. It's different when it's a baby, although I still think it's barbaric. TMI, my son's not circumcised, but it's a completely different ball. I think people like to equate these things, and it's just not the same. You're talking about taking in many cases, a young preteen girl and literally cutting off a piece of her vagina. Not not cutting off the tip of the skin. It's just completely different and way more painful. And again, not regulated. If you tried to circumcise your kid in your bathroom and you took him to the hospital and they said, "What the hell happened?" And he said, "Well, I didn't want to pay the doctor, so I took scissors to my son's penis and I may have screwed it up and I didn't really." They would take your kids from you. And if we heard about religious fundamentalists marrying 13-year-old girls off to old men, we would kick the door in and send in a SWAT team. We did that in Waco, Texas. The Branch Davidian cult was marrying young girls, and the whole country was like, what the hell? And we burned it down and accidentally killed pretty much everyone inside except for the women and children who were let go. Not exactly the FBI's finest moment, but we did something very drastic about that. When it happens in Canada, we say, well, you know, we gotta respect people's religions, and it's ridiculous. It's insane. It's actually insane.
It's actually insane because you're talking about us all as if we are all human beings. That's why. Because you're not differentiating between this group of people and this group of people. You're saying we're all human beings. We all have the same bodies. When you beat this child or beat this child, they're going to have the same amount of bruises. They're going to have the same amount of psychological childhood trauma. When you cut this girl's clitoris or you cut this girl's clitoris or whatever it is that you're doing, you're marrying off this 9-year-old child or you're marrying off this 13-year-old child, whether it's happening in Afghanistan or whether it's happening in Texas, these are human beings. Mm-hmm. These are young girls and they deserve to be protected. But what's happening is other people do not view us as equal human beings to them. They see us as something different. They see us as something subhuman, to be honest. They really don't think that when these things happen to us, that we are just as traumatized by it as they would be if it had happened to them. They think that for some reason when it happens to us, it's okay, because of the accident of birth, because we happen to have been born on a different part of this spinning rock that we're all on, that somehow makes us fundamentally different from them. And that's one of the most difficult things for me to be able to understand from people who call themselves liberals, anti-racists, where they can, in one breath, they can go on and on about how they support the LGBT community. But then when you talk about, okay, but in Iran, they'll execute people for being gay, and then they'll tell you that you're being ethnocentric or that you're being Islamophobic or whatever. Like exactly like you said at the top of this conversation, it's like they remove their brain and they throw it in the garbage before they're able to have a conversation with you. Suddenly they forget what feminism is. They forget what liberalism is. They forget what human rights are. They forget what religious fundamentalism is. They recognize it when it's Christian fundamentalism. Of course they do. My God. Try and not bake a cake for a gay couple and they'll remind you that they're very aware of what Christian fundamentalism is. But when it comes to Muslim fundamentalists, when it comes to Muslim extremists, when it comes to them stabbing writers or not allowing teachers the Batley Grammar School teacher in the UK is in hiding with his whole family, and he's still better off than the teacher in France who was beheaded in the streets when he was on his way home to his wife and son. I mean, all of these things are happening and we can't talk about it. Are you kidding me? If these were the Westboro Baptist Church doing this, or if these were any group with white skin doing this, you would be able to have this conversation and you would understand why this criticism is very valid and why we need to have this conversation. But because they happen to have a little bit more pigmentation in their skin, or because they happen to have come from a different geographical location, suddenly they can't have this conversation and they can't recognize it. So the only difference is that they're not seeing us all as human beings.
That's an interesting observation. And you're right. It's kind of like the only logical conclusion is you're just put in a separate category because of cognitive dissonance and the fact that these two ideas that, we can't be racist, but also it's not racist to say these certain things about this one particular kind of religion. It's like, my brain can't hold these two things together, so I'm just going to err on the side of not thinking critically about this at all. And tell me, I mean, you started to break free of this, especially while you were back in Egypt. You were taught to originally ignore your gut feelings and your intuition because it's from the devil. And anytime you questioned anything with respect to Islam, you were literally slapped in the face or at least rebuffed. No room for critical thought in the household. I think your mother kept saying, the devil makes you question, which is really rich coming from I mean, wasn't Islam, weren't they like the earliest scientists? I mean, there was this whole renaissance where a lot of the science was developed by these people. And then it's like, now let's throw that all out the window, go back like 500 more years to get rid of all our gains here. It's just crazy. And you give a really good example of how your Egyptian extended family responds to curiosity and questions. Tell me about your uncle, and he's eating like this candy bar. This is such a great metaphor for the level of thinking that's not going on over there.
It was such a moment for me. It was such a shocking moment. But yeah, he was eating a candy bar with crisps in it. It had like, puffed Rice Krispies. And he said, I wonder what these crispy things are in my chocolate bar. And I said, it's rice. And he started laughing and he's like, what do you mean it's rice? Ha ha ha. And I'm sure there's some chicken in there too, right? Like, ha ha ha. Like, because rice in Egyptian food is like, it's a staple, it like if you think of like Asian food or something, so it's always very savory and it's always part of every meal. So he just could not, he couldn't believe that it would be puffed rice that was in his chocolate bar. And I'm thinking to myself, like, they don't have Rice Krispies. Rice is never, they don't rice pudding, and I'm like, read the ingredients. He's like, I don't need to read the ingredients. Dude, what do you think I am? Stupid? Of course it's not rice. And I'm like, just read the packaging. Like, he wouldn't even read the packaging because he was so sure that there's no way that it could be rice in there, and that it was so stupid for me to even come up with this, cockamamie idea that there could be rice in his chocolate bar. And yeah, that's pretty much what it is. Like, they're so sure that they know that they're unwilling to learn. They're unwilling to look further. Once you say, I know, once you say, this is the truth, I know the truth, the difference, you stop learning at that point.
It's not just ignorance, but it's ignorance that is just celebrated and enshrined as almost like a virtue. I'm not going to read the label because it might tell me something that I don't want to know and disagree with. And I'm so deluded that I'm not even uncomfortable saying that I might learn something else. I'm just going to pretend it can't happen.
Yes. And that is exactly why the term Islamophobia is used to shut down criticism, to shut down conversation, because they don't even want to engage in discussion. They don't even want to engage in any kind of discourse because it's like, this is the truth and we cannot question it. And that's it. We must move forward. And it's like cyborgs, they have been, this is the software that's been put into them. And they cannot, like a horse with blinders, they cannot look, they cannot speak, they cannot acknowledge that there could be any other ways of looking at the world.
So you're married to this guy who we'll get into because he's a real sort of gem in himself here. Sarcasm noted. There's paper over the windows. There's because, God forbid someone should see you in the house without your head covering or your face covering, whatever. Paper over the windows, no friends allowed. How did having your own child at that point then change your opinion of your mother? Because she was nuts, as I mentioned before, highly abusive. The book details a lot more than everything we've just talked about. I mean, we have barely scratched the surface here. But I'm wondering, once you had a kid, did you realize just how impossible it would have been for you to feel about your own child the way your mother felt about and treated you?
Yes, that was exactly it. I was filled with such overwhelming love for this little baby. And, she didn't do anything to earn my love. She just exists, she was just born. And I never knew that I could feel that much love for another person. And I wanted more than anything to protect her and for her to always feel happiness and for her to never know sadness. And yeah, then I started to realize, you know, my whole life with my mom was this, her withholding love and me needing to earn it, me needing to be good enough to deserve her love. And that moment of holding my baby and loving her so much, and then realizing, why didn't my mom feel this way about me? Why do I have to earn her love? You know, my daughter would never have to earn my love. Like, I will always love her unconditionally. And so that was one of the moments when I realized that there was something terribly wrong here. And it was like the first time that I realized that I'm not the messed up one. You know, that the fault wasn't mine, because my whole life, I always thought it was my fault. I'm the reason why my mom didn't love me, is because I was unlovable. You know, she would tell me it's because you're not as compliant as your sister, because you are, you know, I was always doing things wrong. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't subservient enough. I wasn't quiet enough. And at that moment, I realized that it's never going to be enough. It's because it's not about me. It was never about me. The problem wasn't me. I mean, I did everything she wanted me to do. I married the man she told me to marry. I allowed myself to be raped. I allowed myself to be beaten. I allowed myself to be covered head to toe in black, walking around like a ghost amongst people, not even being able to communicate with other human beings as I walked amongst them, being so dehumanized, being so diminished. I allowed all of that to happen to me because I thought that if I was good enough, she might love me. And then I realized at that moment that there's nothing that I can do that's going to make her love me, because there's nothing that my daughter needed to do to make me love her. I don't know if that makes any sense, but
it does make sense.
That normal mother-child bond feeling, which I didn't realize was normal. It was so overwhelming. And as a parent, you would know what I mean when you hold your firstborn, and to know that was not the feeling that my mom had when she held me. And I mean, I shouldn't have been surprised. She's told me so many times, right? Like
right.
She had an ectopic pregnancy before she had me. She didn't think she was going to get pregnant again. Her and my dad were broken up. She told him she was on the pill, and he never wanted to have a kid, and she never wanted to have a kid. And she thought she would keep the pregnancy because it would make him come back to her, and he didn't even come back to her. So I was useless. And I was like this extra appendage that she had. She didn't want to have me. And she resented me because here she is having to feed a third mouth, and I didn't even serve my purpose of keeping my dad with her. And, you know, I heard about this all the time. I think it's like it reminds me somewhat of when a mother dies in childbirth and the father kind of has like this resentment towards the child, like, you killed my wife. That's how she had that kind of resentment towards me, like that. I don't think that she ever felt the way, like, she never felt that connection with me that I felt with my daughters when they were born. And she also said that she never wanted to have kids at all. She never liked kids. She didn't understand why people thought babies were cute. But again, it was the societal expectation. As a Muslim woman, your job is to make more Muslims, to grow the ummah. That's your whole purpose. So you're a baby making thing. And yeah, so it was just the expectation.
It must have taken you a long time to realize that your mom, I mean, like you said, when your daughter was born, you realized it was her. Is she a malignant narcissist? Is she a sociopath? Do you even know? Does it matter at this point? It doesn't really matter, but I'm curious what you think because she's truly an actually terrible person.
Yeah. Um, I don't know what she is, but I have to tell you again, like I really encourage you to watch some of the Forgotten Feminists, because the way I talk about my mom and the things that she's done, um, it's such a common story. It is so repeated over and over and over again. You will hear other women tell this same story again and again. Way worse things than what my mom has done to me. Girls telling stories of their moms locking them in the room and starving them. I know it, like so many women where that's happened to them. My mom never locked me in a room and starved me. You know, like they're just, it's just things that I was watching a movie one time. It was about this Pakistani girl who was like left in Pakistan to get married to her cousin in the same way that I was left in Egypt to get married to my cousin. Same thing. She didn't know it was happening. And in it, there's a point in that movie where she just starts to terrorize a little cat. She just starts to abuse a cat. And I was thinking to myself, like, what a weird thing to put into this movie. And it didn't fit with any of the plot. And so I was thinking about it, and I realized it was to show you that this young girl was so powerless and so full of anger that she decided to take it out on a stray cat because there was no one else that she had power over. And she was just so full of hate and anger. And that is the relationship between many women, many Muslim women, and their daughters. These women feel so trapped and so demoralized and so angry and so resentful, and they can't take it out on their husbands. They can't take it out on their sons. But who can they take it out on? Their daughters. That's a safe place to get all your aggressions out. And that's why we end up becoming the punching bag for many unhappy women.
On a lighter note, how did you find out that your husband was a literal terrorist?
Yeah. So I was actually contacted by the CSIS, who are the Canadian Secret Service.
Okay, so they're like the FBI of Canada, or is it more like the CIA of Canada? Okay.
CIA, yeah. So it was actually really crazy because I would never left the house on my own.
Literally.
And never. And I left the house like once a month for my prenatal visits. If I wasn't going to the doctor, I wasn't leaving the house. And what had happened here was that he was away for the weekend, and my mom had a medical emergency. My mom was living with us at the time. She started coughing up blood and blood coming out of her nose and her mouth at the same time, and she couldn't breathe. And I'm calling 911 and I'm freaking out. And I tried to get a hold of him and I couldn't get a hold of him. And I was afraid to leave the house to go with my mom in the ambulance to the hospital because I knew how much I'm not allowed to leave the house. But then I thought maybe he'll have mercy on me and understand that, you know, my mom is, who knows what's happening to her. And so maybe he'll be okay with the fact that I left the house without his permission. But I was terrified and I almost didn't leave the house, but I did. I went to the hospital with her. And once the doctors pulled her away, this man and woman approached me, and I thought they were doctors. I thought they were, you know, medical professionals of some sort. And they started talking to me. They pulled me into this room. They had a room ready to go talk to me. And I'm thinking, my mom is dying. They're taking me into this private room so that they can tell me about how she's going to die. Like I didn't know what was happening. And they were Secret Service, and they were there to tell me that I was married to a member of Al Qaeda. And they obviously had been watching him. They had been watching the house because they knew this one moment, the one time in the entire time of our marriage that I was without him out of the house was when they approached me. And they showed me pictures and asked me if I recognized any of these men. And they were all like, you know, Bin Laden looking people with the, you know, the turban and everything. And I didn't recognize any of them. He, of course, was not sharing anything with me. I had no information to share with them. They were asking me all sorts of questions. I answered what I could. I knew that he had been in Afghanistan before he came to Canada, but I was told that he was driving the Red Crescent bus, that he was a paramedic, basically, when he was in Afghanistan. Because when he came into Canada, these are all the red flags, Jordan. It's like unbelievable. When he came into Canada, he came from Afghanistan with a fake Saudi Arabian passport. So he's an Egyptian man coming into Canada with a fake Saudi Arabian passport from Afghanistan. Like, so many red flags. And the Canadian government were like, come on in. And they gave him refugee status.
Jeez.
And so that to me kind of legitimized him. I thought, well, the Canadian government know what they're doing. Like, if he was a terrorist, because who's in Afghanistan other than terrorists, right? Like, we all knew about the Mujahideen in those days. But I thought that if he was allowed into the country and given refugee status, then he couldn't have possibly been a terrorist when he was in Afghanistan.
Like, they've certainly done a background investigation and checked this guy out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure.
And so I was asking my mom, why doesn't he have an Egyptian passport? And she said, because Egyptians are criminals and they're blah, blah, blah. And I learned later that the reason why he didn't have his Egyptian passport and why he had to use a fake Saudi Arabian passport was because Egypt takes the passports away from terrorists. They say, we do not own you. You're not. Once you get involved in terrorism, Egypt is like, you're not one of us. And so that's why he didn't have an Egyptian passport anymore. But I didn't know that at the time. I didn't get a proper explanation for why he needed to make a fake Saudi Arabian one. But anyway, I was not aware that he was involved in terrorism when he was in Afghanistan. Which sounds ridiculous to people, but you have to remember too that, you know, I come from an extremist family where, you know, my mom knew that he was involved in terrorism, and she told me that she chose him because he was strong enough to control me.
Mm-hmm.
She wanted a man that was strong enough to control me. And she figured, what could be stronger than a terrorist? But I say terrorist, you say terrorist. They don't say terrorist.
Of course.
They think that he is like the best of humanity, you know? They think like he's like the most pious person, the strongest of faith, that he's willing to die for Allah and kill for Allah. And yeah, so once I knew that I was married to a terrorist, I spoke to my mom about it, and she didn't want to admit it to me. And so I asked him about it, and he was very forthcoming. He's like, yeah, I'm very proud of it. And in fact, I want to go to, now he was like happy that the cat was out of the bag. He wants to take us to Peshawar, me and my daughter. And
that's rural Pakistan? Is that like the Pakistan-Afghanistan border?
Correct.
Region?
Yeah, which is where he was before he came to Canada. And he wanted to continue his life of terrorism there.
Wild. And you find out, I mean, where is this guy now? Do you know at all if he's alive? Is he dead? Where is this guy?
Yeah. He's in prison in Egypt. He was in prison to 15 years hard labor. And this is the crazy thing. is one in Egypt. There was, so Mubarak was the president for so many years. And then there was this big, huge regime change. I don't know if you heard about it, but it was
Called
like,
the Arab Spring. Yeah, I heard about it.
yeah. But during that time, Mubarak was ousted. The military actually ousted him. And then there was this point in time when a Muslim Brotherhood president was in Egypt for a very short amount of time because he's an Islamist. Egyptians didn't want him there, and they got rid of him very quickly. But in that amount of time that he was the president, I don't even know if it was a full year, one of the first things that he did was release all political prisoners. Yeah.
I knew that was going to happen. I wondered if that was my next question. Did he get released during the era? Oh, gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So he was released. And of course, what does he do? Like a boomerang, immediately goes right back into terrorism again. And so he gets caught in Malaysia for some sort of plot.
Thank goodness.
Yeah. And then they send him back to Egypt again. And so he's serving a brand new sentence there. I don't even know if he's still alive at this point, but that happened in 2018.
I mean, I don't know much about Egyptian prison, but I can imagine the ones they have for literal enemies of the state / humanity are even worse than the ones they have for people who, I don't know, shoplift. So
you are correct. There's like the police state, kind of the secret prisons.
Right.
And then there's like the regular one for like the...
Yeah, like it probably makes Abu Ghraib look like a beach resort compared to this. And he was 14 years older than you back when you got married and you were young. I mean, I don't know how old this guy is now, but he's probably not exactly a dude in his prime ready to handle a multi-decade prison sentence in a place like that. I mean, this guy's not going to ever see the light of day if he's not already 6 feet under. Mm-hmm. Hopefully.
Yeah.
But before that, you go to get a divorce. How did he react to that? Because religious fundamentalist terrorists don't really seem like the kind of guys who are going to react maturely or appropriately to something like a divorce, especially when you are not technically even allowed to divorce him under the rules of Islam, correct? So,
that's correct.
Yeah, so that must have been, that's like, this is like you bringing home a bad report card to your parents times a million. I mean, this is, and I'm saying that in obvious jest, this is a dangerous situation. This guy, there's a real chance he'll kill you for this.
If he got his hands on me, yeah.
Right. So how did you do that?
So that was I don't even know how, it was, you know, when they talk about like the flap of a butterfly's wing, like that's what this was all about. Like it was just it could have gone wrong in so many different ways, but basically, I didn't get away from him fast enough and I ended up getting pregnant again. And when I got pregnant, I had a breakdown essentially. And I felt like, that's it. It's over. I'm done. You know, I can't be a single mom with 2 kids and a high school education. Like I'm finished. You know, Peshawar, here I come. This is it. This is my life now. And I completely submitted. So the definition of the word Islam is to submit. And my whole life, and because you've read my book, you know this, it's a series of me trying to stand up and getting swatted down, and then standing up again and then getting swatted down, standing up again and getting swatted down. But this time I was down for the count. I was like, I'm not going to even try to stand up after this. I'm finished. And then I found out that the baby didn't have a heartbeat. Mm. And so, of course, I'm feeling this simultaneous, like I killed my baby because I didn't want it. You know, I did this, feeling so much guilt over that, but then also feeling like I need to be able to save the baby that I do have and get out of this situation before this happens again. Because you can't say no to him. Like it's forbidden to say no to your husband. And that's why I said before that I accepted myself to be raped, because you're not allowed to say no according to the religion. And so when I went in for the DNC surgery, they told me you're going to go under general anesthetic and you're going to need someone to help you. You need someone to drive you home. You need someone to help you with your daughter afterwards because you're going to be kind of groggy and in pain. And so I told him that I would need 7 days to recover. And I knew it wasn't going to be 7 days, but I wanted to give myself enough time to escape.
Yeah.
And I knew that escaping from my mom's house would be easier than escaping from his house because I knew he wasn't going to help me with the baby. If I said I need help with the baby for 7 days, he's not going to be like, okay,
let me step up to the plate. Right. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. He was immediately like, go to your mother's. I'll pick you up in a week. And I was like, sweet. I totally expected you to say that. And so I went to my mom's. She got up the next morning. Of course, I'm not going to tell my mom what I'm doing because she's just like him.
Right.
And so luckily she wasn't living with us anymore. She was on her own at this point. And she got up in the morning to go to the Islamic school where she was the head of the Islamic Studies department there. And I went through the yellow pages because it was back in the day. And I found a female, because I was still indoctrinated in that I can't talk to men. And I was still covered head to toe in black. And I wanted to be able to lift up my thing and talk to somebody. And I found a female lawyer who was close by who was willing to do this program, lawyer referral, where they have like a 30-minute consultation with you for free before they decide if they're going to take your case or not. And so I had the appointment with her at 1 o'clock that afternoon, and my mom was going to be home. Like she's finished school at 3. And so it was a tight turnaround, but I made it there, and the sight of everybody in the office when I walked in, like head to toe in black, carrying the baby. And speaking so quickly, I was so panicked. I was so scared I wasn't going to make it back home in time. And my mom would be like, where were you? And there was no cell phones at that time. So I basically had to tell her, like, I need a full custody, I need a divorce, and I need a restraining order. And you can't contact me after I leave here.
Sure.
And she was amazing. I'm still in contact with her because she was like one of my guardian angels at this time, which I didn't even know in this moment. I was so frantic. And she's like, I got it. It's all good. It's taken care of. And I didn't know if it was taken care of. I had no idea. I went back and I was just, so panicked, not knowing what was going on, not knowing if I gave her all the information, not knowing what was happening, and just kind of waiting. And a few days pass, and then all of a sudden, we hear him screaming in Arabic. My mom lives in an apartment building, and he's like screaming from the front doors of the building in Arabic. And he's like, give me back my wife.
Oh, that's scary.
So angry that his thing was taken from him. His possession was taken from him. Nobody has a right to take his stuff without his permission, and going on about how he's going to cut my face up. It was really terrifying. And I called 911, of course, and they were like, yes, we know, we've gotten many calls about the 6'4" man screaming in Arabic. And the police came to talk to me, and they explained to me what a restraining order was. And they said, it's not like you see it on TV. Basically, it means that we can only, whatever the distance was, I can't remember exactly, 150 meters or something. I don't know. We can say that he's not allowed to go to certain buildings where you will be. So your home, your school. But they said, if you happen to be in the mall, or if you happen to be at the park with your daughter, we can't control that. And so essentially what I heard from them was, you're under house arrest. Do not leave this house. Yeah.
And so it's like, I'm used to that, right? Well, no, story of my life. House arrest, fine. At least he can't be in there beating me up. And I'm not trying to make light of this, but it's like...
You are 100% correct, yeah.
It's so harrowing and disgusting. And just... Your daughter, though, is 50% this man's DNA. I assume that's... You've had to think about that. There's got to be some sort of rationalization there, because he's horrible, objectively, right? I mean... The guy's a terrorist, but your daughter she's magical. She's the center of your world. How do you, as a mom, reconcile that? Obviously, you're not going to. You're not your mom. You're not going to associate your daughter with that. But it's got to be. There's got to be kind of a little bit of a tug there going on psychologically.
Yeah, I was always petrified that I would see him in her, always waiting for that moment, like just kind of like on edge, when kids are like fighting over a toy or um, having any kind of temper tantrum or anything like that. I was so hyper vigilant, so terrified that I would see in her um, something to remind me of
Hmm.
him. I mean, I am very lucky that she's such an amazing little kid. Because if she was one of those kids that like bites other children
Right.
or, because the kids do this crazy stuff, right?
My kids bit a
Um,
few people, and we're like,
there you
how
go.
do we fix that? Like we look so bad. They're like, your son bit someone again, and we're like, oh, all kids do that, right? And they're like, well, your son 5 times, everyone else is 0 to 1, and we're like, yeah, we're terrible parents. So,
Yeah, you
mm,
can't, it's just, if my daughter was one of those kids, like for you, it's not that, it's not going to hit you in the heart, like, oh my God. But for me, I'm like
right.
waiting to see hints
But
of a terrorist in
sure,
my child,
sure, right,
And
yeah. Oh God.
so,
Yeah,
so I would
I
have,
just blame my wife and go, he gets that from you. And she's like, fine, whatever. Um, but yeah, no, she doesn't go, this is because you're an Al Qaeda, Jordan. I told you,
yeah,
right? That doesn't,
yeah,
there's no
yeah.
danger of that.
Yeah, so I really overdid it, but I was always really afraid. And I had no need to be afraid. She's an amazing, wonderful kid. And it wasn't until I was like, she was a teenager that somebody said to me, "Are you like your mom? Why would you think that she would be like her dad?" And I was like, "Why did
Yeah,
I think of
mind
that?"
blown. Yeah, exactly.
I could have just like that would have saved me so many years of torturing myself. But yeah, I was
That's
waiting
funny.
for something to happen that never did. She's such a compassionate, wonderful person, and uh, you know, I'm so grateful for her, and I tell her all the time that she saved my life. If it wasn't for her, and if it wasn't for my desire for her to not live the life that I had lived, or in fact live a life even worse than what I had lived, um, and also she kept me from, you know, killing myself so many
Sure.
times when it was really, really dark and I had no family support. I had no community support. I was all on my own. I was scared. I was petrified that this guy was going to find me or he's going to send his friends after me. All of those years of being too scared to speak to anybody. I don't want to even tell anybody why I'm scared because I don't want it to get through the grapevine. Like I just lived in such fear for so long. And if I didn't have to take care of a toddler, um, you know, I would have probably just taken the easy way out.
Sure. Yeah, I think a lot of people, they're going to say, why didn't you get out earlier? But you don't have food for your kid. You don't have shelter for your kid. You move in with your brother and he is beating you up in front of her. And it's like, that's, you mentioned in the book, that's one of the parts of you that says, okay, I've got to get out of here so my daughter doesn't think this is how women are treated, right? With my brother bashing me in front of her at age 2. I mean, just sociopathic craziness. And by the way, there's people are going to say, "What about women's shelters?" At the end of the episode, in the show notes, I'm going to put some women's shelters in the U.S. and Canada for people who need help. So if you're listening to this and somebody you know needs help, go to the show notes, jordanharbinger.com. There's going to be some resources and contact info in there because I think a lot of people don't know about this. I assume you also did not know. Hey, there are places that are designed for people like
Yeah.
you to bring your kid, and they won't tell anyone you're there.
I
People don't
wish
know
I
about
knew.
this.
But
Yeah,
it's like I was explaining before how we were kind of in a bubble. We're in the society, but we're not part of the society. So I
right.
wouldn't have even known about the social services that were
Hmm.
available to me. I knew that there was welfare because my mom was on it. So I knew that that existed. But I didn't know that there were women's shelters. And these are, this is pre-Google. That's the kind of thing that you got to explain to people. Like, it wasn't information wasn't as readily available at our fingertips the way it is now. You know, the days before cell phones and the days before Google, if you didn't know something, if you didn't know where to go for something, then you didn't know. You know, the information had to cross your path somehow. And that information never crossed my path. I was going to Islamic schools. I was living in an Islamic community. I was separated from the greater society around me. And I wanted to say also, when you talked about why didn't she leave earlier, everything that you said is true as far as just like logistics, like not having money, not having any education, not having any support system. All of that is true. But also I was severely indoctrinated still. I mean, even though I hated him and I wanted to get my daughter out, I was still at that time thinking, oh, Allah will help me to get away from him. You know, like I wasn't, my mind wasn't free. It was just about trying to get a better life for my daughter.
It's like the baby elephant metaphor where they tie the baby elephant to the concrete slab and it can't get away and it pulls and pulls and pulls, it can't get away. And as the elephant grows, they just keep tying it to the stake, the little stick in the ground. And so these humongous elephants will just be stuck and they can't move even though there's a stick stuck 3 inches into the ground or whatever that's tying them up, because psychologically they've learned helplessness. They've given up trying to get away. And so that indoctrination makes sense. It's hard for people on the outside of a culture like this to understand. The same people are going to say, what about Child Protective Services? You could have done something. You could have told a teacher.
Aren't they the one I did?
Yeah, you did tell a teacher.
He wrote the forward to my book. Yeah,
right.
Useless.
I think people don't realize we lost our connection earlier. I was going to ask you about this. You told a teacher and he went to a judge, and the judge said, well, you know, some cultures, they discipline more strongly than others. And so we're just going to let this girl get beat up by her family because they're immigrants and that's what they do or whatever. And it's so disgusting.
Yep. And that goes to speak to what I was saying before about seeing us as subhuman.
So you're divorced, you're in school, learning critical thinking skills for literally the first time in your life. What is that like? To just be an adult?
It was intoxicating. It really was intoxicating. Okay. It was like, I don't even know what to tell you. It was like my brain was firing up in places that nothing had ever fired there before. Like when you're part of this, when you're indoctrinated and you have to think a certain way and you're not allowed to think. Okay, so I'm going to give you the example that we are told, and that is, you have to walk the long, straight path. It's called a Sirat al-Mustaqim. And when they visualize it, it's like a tightrope. And below the tightrope are the fires of hell. And so you have to walk along this tightrope. And if you misstep, you will fall to hell. And so your whole life, you're walking like one foot in front of the other like this. And you have to do everything the right way. You put your shoes on, right foot first. You walk into the bathroom, you say this little dua, right foot first. Everything is laid out for you. How you drink your water, how you eat your food, how you go to the bathroom, Jordan, everything, every single how you cut your toenails. Everything is laid out for you, and you do not think ever. You just do as you're told. And thinking is dangerous. It's not only is it's punished, but it's terrifying to think. It's terrifying to want to question, because like you said, they tell you it's the devil whispering in your ear. And so when you start to have thoughts that are not along this straight, narrow path, you're terrified that those thoughts are going to sway you and you're going to fall off of this tightrope. And so you don't want to hear it. You don't want to think about it. You don't want to see it. You don't want to know it. You just want to keep going forward. And so to be sitting in a university classroom, and I took a course called History of Religions purely because I thought it would be an easy A. Sure. With my mom being an Islamic studies teacher, we were under so much pressure to be good Islamic studies students because it's going to, reflect on her. And so I thought, well, this course is going to focus on the three Abrahamics, the three monotheistic religions. So I've got a third of this content covered. So let me take this course. The professor was a Lebanese man. I don't know if he was atheist at the time, but he grew up Christian anyway. And so he's an Arab just like me, but a very different experience being
Sure.
Christian Lebanese versus Muslim Lebanese. But we had kind of that kinship where he could understand what I needed to know.
Hmm.
Do you know what I mean? And he wasn't going to
Yeah.
be like the kind of woke profs these days where they're going to sweep those things under the rug. He wanted me to see all of the things that he knew I wasn't aware of. And one of the things that he really, because it being a history of religions, one of the things that I learned about for the first time was how many stories from the Quran are taken from like pagan stories, like ancient Egyptian mythology and things like that. And they teach you that this is the divine word of Allah, right? And here I am going, hang on a minute. These stories existed way before Muhammad did. Like,
Literally thousands of years before. Right.
yeah, this is not adding up. You know, this is not some divine stories. These are just plagiarized.
Plagiarized, exactly. Yeah. Stuff you
And
get kicked out of college if you do. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And we're seeing like so many things taken from Judaism. And, you know, it was just a hobbled mess of plagiarism. And I started to recognize that. And then, of course, there's all of the many, many verses about like the earth being flat and sperm coming out of your backbone and all of these like ridiculously unscientific nonsense that like, if this guy created the earth, don't you think he would know that he didn't create it flat? Like,
Right. Yeah, you
and
think he knows the shape. Yeah.
yeah, so many things like that. Things about Muhammad encouraging people to drink camel urine as medicine.
Oof.
You know, all of these things. And it was like a thread unraveling the sweater, you know, and I was eager, so thirsty for this knowledge and so excited to think that, holy shit, you mean I don't have to follow this religion? You mean I don't have to accept this for myself? You mean I don't have to accept that I am lesser than men? There's a hadith that the Prophet of Islam says that women are less intelligent than men and lesser than men in religion and in mind. And that's thrown at you all the time. Men are responsible for women, or what men like are basic guardians of women. Like there's so much misogyny in that religion that you have to just accept. You have to accept that you are lesser than. And your whole life you're looking at these men going, this can't be right.
Right. The guy who can't read and write that I'm married to is smarter than me. Like I can,
Yeah.
come on, folks.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
have suspicions. And so, you know, it was like, it was exciting, but it was also really, 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 really terrifying simultaneously. Because as much as it was weird because then that's when I lived like this double life for a while where I'd go to university during the day in my hijab and everything. But then at night I'd go clubbing with my friends and drinking, you know, and it took a while for me to, you know, to not, how do I say this? I didn't believe in all that stuff anymore, but I was still scared of it.
Sure.
So hard to, but it's like the indoctrination is in your bones. Like it's so deep in your mind. And, it doesn't go overnight. It's not like flipping a switch, you know, even if you know that all of this stuff is nonsense, you're still so, you know, I don't know. I don't
It's
know
in a
how to
different part of your
describe it.
brain. It's like in a different part of your psyche, your programming.
Yeah. And it takes a while to deprogram yourself, to start to even say the words, I'm not a Muslim. Like I couldn't say that for the longest time. I'd just be like, I'm not practicing, or my family is Muslim. I'd use all sorts of different euphemisms, but I wouldn't be able to say like, I am not a Muslim. I denounce that religion. Do not like when people call me a Muslim because they see my name and they're like, as a Muslim woman, I'm like, I ignore most of my messages, but I'll answer that one and I'll be like, I am not a Muslim woman. I denounced that religion 15 years ago. So it's like, it's insulting to me now when somebody calls me a Muslim. Yeah.
So this is where I'm going to sound a little ignorant here, but then again, this whole episode is going to get me canceled probably at some point. I know you were a teacher in the Middle East. I think, was it Qatar? Was that where it was? Okay.
Yes.
So if everyone there, every woman, was wearing a niqab or a burqa, again, I'm not sure of the difference, but the full covering, how can you tell each other apart? If you're teaching a class and all the women have that, how do you know if that's your friend or a student or just another random woman wearing the same thing?
Yeah.
How do you
First
know?
day of classes, I wouldn't know.
Sure.
It takes a while, but then you start to get to know, they'll wear, like everybody's covered head to toe in black, but it's like a different way of wearing it.
Okay.
Or different body shape, or some wear glasses, or this one prefers to wear heels. You know what I mean? Like you just sort of start to pick up. I still got them confused sometimes.
Sure.
But you start to pick up on like nuances like that. Yeah.
That makes sense. It just seems like you lose so much of your appearance, of course, when you're all covered up. But then again, I mean, maybe a loss of identity is kind of the point. Is there anything to that?
It is. Absolutely, there's something to that. Yes, of course. That's part of the reason why I scream about the hijab so much, is because it strips away your individuality. And therefore, it strips away your humanity. You are no longer a individual person. You are a thing. You are Muslim girl. That's what you are. And that's a part of it, because then you don't think of yourself as an individual. You think of yourself as this collective blob. And so when it's like the school of fish, right? If you think of yourself as part of this entity, then you're never going to think about stepping outside of it or doing something different, or, having a thought that it hasn't been, narrated to you. And so, yes, it is a big part of it. And it's one of the most difficult things of leaving the religion. There's that very famous movie back in the day with Julia Roberts called Eat, Pray, Love, where there's this moment where they ask her, how do you like your eggs? And she's like, I don't even know, because I just ate the eggs the way the man I was with made the eggs. And I never really thought about it. And so she sits there with like poached eggs and scrambled eggs and sunny side, all different kinds of eggs, so she can figure out how she likes her eggs. And of course, that's, just a theatrical thing. But essentially, that's what you're doing when you leave this religion. You have to figure out, like, who am I? What do I like? What do I believe in? What do I want for myself? You don't know anything about who you are, because all you've ever done is follow the rules and do what you're told. Just obey, 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 obey. And as a Muslim Arab woman, obeying is not just about you. It's about your whole family. It's the honor of the family is on you. If you don't obey, you've not just disgraced yourself, but you've disgraced the whole family. And so that kind of pressure, I cannot tell you how heavy that is, and how, how dark it is, and how you don't want to move. You don't want to be an individual. Mm-hmm. You just want to do what you're told, and you want to stay on the straight path because you don't want to mess it up for like the whole family.
I think also other people, if you're walking around, you mentioned this earlier, you feel like a ghost when you're covered up. It seems like if other people kind of they literally can't see you. They just see a bunch of robes basically and cloth and a face covering. And there's a person in there, but I don't think like, oh, there goes my neighbor, I should say hi. It's almost like a ghost that's just walking around in the street. There are some people in my neighborhood, and I don't even know how to handle it. And I know I'm not the only one. So it must make them feel also, or you in this case, feel like, oh, I'm just cut off from society. These people don't even see me. They don't know what I look like. How am I going to do anything? I'm complete. The idea is you are removed from this, but by design.
Yeah.
And I think, a lot of people in positions like me are afraid to have these kinds of conversations, because talking about this, I was sort of joking that it was going to get me canceled, but I think a lot of people, I'm going to get feedback like, you're racist, you're a white supremacist, you cherry picked somebody who's an ex-Muslim so that you could have this, fulfill your agenda of whatever my agenda is supposedly going to be to that person. Tell me why critiquing fundamentalist Islam like this is not racist or whatever.
It's really sad to hear you say that, because I know it's true. But it's like, why don't we matter? Why don't our voices, why don't our stories, why isn't that something that is worthy of hearing and of addressing? And why is it wrong to be angry for us? And why is it wrong to want to support us? You know what I mean? Like it's like when if you had a Black woman on this show talking about how she had a very racist boss and she had such a negative experience because of that racism, you wouldn't have people say to you, "Oh, Jordan, you cherry picked that. Most Black women are happy in America." Mm-hmm. They would be like, "Oh my God, that's horrible. I'm sorry that happened to her." If you had a trans woman on this show and she started to talk about what she's been through, nobody's going to say, "Well, that's just her experience." They're going to understand that this person's life matters, that other women like her or other men like her or other trans people or other whatever, doesn't matter, other human beings have experienced the same things that she's experienced or similar things. And we should care about that. We should care about these people. We shouldn't want to silence them because the fundamentalists that oppress them want us to stay silent, because the fundamentalists that oppress them will also shoot us and stab us and kill us. And so we're afraid of them. And so we're not going to speak up for them. And therefore, you're not speaking up for yourself either. Right? It's like that old, I didn't speak up for the X because I wasn't X, and I didn't speak up for the Y because I wasn't Y. You can continue saying for as long as you want, we're going to ignore all of these women that are screaming out of the Muslim majority world, screaming for their lives. They're being killed daily over the tiniest infractions. Posted a picture on Instagram, dead. Posted a picture on Facebook, dead. This isn't just happening over there. Like, these kinds of things happen over here too. About that father that killed his 2 daughters in Texas, that the FBI were after for so long, but he was protected by his father, by his son and his brother. These are, even if you're going to ignore it and say, this isn't going to happen to us, their stories are over there, that's their culture, that's their business, it seeps into your life. 9/11 didn't just kill Muslim people. It killed American people in the middle of New York, and we don't even have to go as far back as 9/11. Like, you can, all of the Charlie Hebdo journalists, Salman Rushdie in the middle of New York, in the UK when they were trying to have these anti-homophobic education in the schools. I'm trying to remember what it was called, like No Kid Left Behind. No, that's American. I can't remember. Yeah, that's like an education
thing. I don't remember either. Yeah.
But it was about teaching kids that whether you're gay or straight or Muslim or Black or white or whatever you are, we're all British and we're all in this together. And you had Muslim families getting so irate over this, getting so angry at this. They were pulling down the rainbow flags and they were throwing tomatoes and eggs at anybody that tried to put these rainbow flags up on the schools again. Like, what I'm trying to tell you is you're going to have this clash of civilizations. It's good. It's not just going to stop with us. If you turn your head and you pretend this isn't happening to you, it will reach you. We see it happening to the Jewish communities in France, the Jewish communities in New York, the Jewish communities in Sweden and in Austria and all over, from the Islamists, from the Muslim extremists, because of their vicious hate for Jewish people. We see it happening. It's happening. It's coming towards you. It is on its way. You can't just continue to say that's them and I don't want to talk about it. You know, this is your business too. And if it isn't your business today, it will be your business very soon. And so what we're trying to do is we're the whistleblowers. We are literally risking our lives to blow this whistle for you. I'm free. I'm free. I am trying to speak to my fellow Western liberals, and I'm trying to get you to see this danger that is on the horizon. And you have to talk about it. You have to criticize it. You have to stand up for free expression. You have to stand up for liberalism. You have to stand up for human rights. You can't just continue to ignore these conversations and claim Islamophobia and claim bigotry and to allow these things to continue to grow to your own detriment. You are hurting yourselves at the end of the day. And that's what we're trying to say, is that we're the whistleblowers here, risking our lives to blow this whistle, to say, this is what I've been through. This is how dangerous this ideology is. These are all the things that could happen. These are the things that are happening today, everywhere. Please pay attention.
Well, that was a hell of an ending. And we went a hell of a lot longer than we'd originally planned. So I want to thank you for your time and your energy and your vulnerability here today. I know this can't be easy to talk about, a lot of this stuff. I really appreciate it. I know my listeners do as well. And I appreciate your work. I think I was not really aware of any of this. I heard you on my friend Andrew Gold's show, which we'll link in the show notes. And I thought, like, this is an interesting kind of thing. Maybe there's something there. And then when I dove into it, it's one of those things that's literally happening more or less in my backyard. And I just, like we discussed today, didn't pay attention, didn't think it was my thing, figured whatever, it's sort of their culture. Now it sort of freaks me out that there could be, and I'm not even talking about terrorism, I'm just talking about abuse that could be happening that I will just not know about because I'm so disconnected from these people and they're so disconnected from everyone else around here. That should scare everybody who lives in a multicultural society. In other words, any country in the West. And we all live near this. You know, there's a lot of Vietnamese and Chinese immigrants around here, and there are these like massage places, and you see these women who are just clearly trafficked. You know, they're so they don't speak any English. You see them around, and they're kind of like wearing cocktail dresses in an alley where the chairs are in the back door. And I know I'm sort of implicating myself. I swear it's by the fruit market. But really, like, you see this and you just go, huh, that's happening right under my nose. And this is it's similar. It's this thing that's happening that people who are kind of around it, it's second nature to them. They see it every day. Yeah. But the rest of us, we're totally oblivious.
But the insidious part here is if you start to talk about girls being trafficked, mm-hmm. nobody's going to call you a trafficophobic or whatever.
No, they're not going to say you hate Vietnamese people. They're going to go, exactly. Oh yeah, that thing happens. That happens. It's horrible. Yes. Yeah.
Yes. They will recognize the evil that it for what it is.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. This is like this weird exception that we need to stop treating as an exception because the victims are not just us eventually with terrorism potentially, which sounds like a stretch. It's the people girls who grow up in Canada or the United States should have the same rights as anybody else who doesn't look like them that's growing up in Canada or the United States, even if their dad thinks they can be branded or beaten up or have hot oil poured on them because they did some weird thing, some weird made up infraction written by a guy in 600 AD that couldn't read or write, or thought the world was flat, or et cetera. I mean, it's just constantly. This really does open your eyes onto something that's highly uncomfortable, I think, for a lot of people, especially kind of like the more liberal crowd. and that's good. It makes us think about this in a way that we're supposed to be making ourselves uncomfortable. That's kind of the idea, right? So thank you for
Yes.
that.
Thank you. I really appreciate your bravery in having this conversation. I appreciate you reaching out to me. And I know that you're going to be inundated with a
Oh
lot
yeah.
of negative comments, but I really hope that you will reach people and that people will hear this conversation and that their mind will be opened, seeds will be planted. They'll start to do a little bit more digging, they'll start to do a little bit more learning. They'll start to understand that we're all human beings and we all want our freedoms and we all want our autonomy. And especially when it comes to women, that women over here or women over there or women wherever, we all want to be treated as equal human beings. And you cannot pretend that you think that women who are forced to cover themselves up and to stay in the house and to not go to school are being treated the same as you.